Um, Picture a scenario that is, probably a little too familiar to you. Have you ever watched a manager, maybe even your own manager at some point, completely ignore a glaring performance problem on the team until it like finally explodes into this massive
Oh,
crisis?
yeah. We've all been there.
Right. Or on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, have you ever seen a leader micromanage a group of perfectly competent people straight into just massive turnover?
All the time. It is so common.
Yeah, these are the kinds of everyday leadership failures we see everywhere. And they don't just frustrate employees, right? They cost organizations real money, they drain top talent, and they absolutely kill forward momentum.
They really do. And it's a pervasive issue because for a lot of people who are suddenly thrust into leadership roles, the default psychological reaction to a performance issue is either, well, avoidance or control.
Yeah, fight or flight, basically.
Exactly. When you're operating purely on instinct, there isn't much middle ground there. You either, hide in your office hoping the problem just magically fixes itself, or you storm into the room and start dictating every little detail.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because ignoring an employee's performance issues is basically like ignoring the check engine light on your dashboard.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You know something is wrong under the hood, right? The little red indicator's right there in your face every time you turn the key, but you just keep driving. You're relying on some vague hope that the car will just repair itself.
Which never happens.
Right, the engine never fixes itself. The damage just compounds until you're stranded on the side of the highway. So the mission of this deep dive today is to explore a source text that deals with exactly this problem. It outlines this tool called the Coaching Skills Inventory. And it's basically a framework designed to diagnose those exact manager blind spots and transform them from bad bosses into highly effective coaches.
And, the check engine light analogy is spot on, but I'd actually take it a step further.
Ooh.
How so?
Well, when that light comes on, an amateur mechanic just unplugs the bulb so they don't have to look at it anymore, right? But a real mechanic plugs in a diagnostic tool to find the actual root cause.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And that is what the Coaching Skills Inventory is really trying to be for human behavior. I think the most empowering takeaway from the source material we're looking at today is the foundational idea that great manager coaching is not an innate talent.
It's not something you're just born with.
Exactly. You are not simply born with a good boss gene. Management is a specific, defined skill set. And because it's a behavioral skill, it can be learned, it can be measured, and it can be mastered by anyone who is willing to put in the analytical work.
Well, okay, if this is a concrete skill that can be learned, what exactly is the curriculum? Because I feel like the word coaching gets thrown around corporate environments so often that it's almost lost all meaning.
Yeah, it becomes a buzzword. Totally. People use it synonymously with just managing.
Yeah.
So how does this source material actually define the difference between traditional management and real coaching?
It's a huge difference. It represents a fundamental paradigm shift in how you view your relationship with the people actually doing the work. Effective coaching skills, according to the text anyway, are emphatically not about reprimanding employees.
Okay.
They're not about threatening consequences or keeping score or, wielding your title like a weapon to force compliance. That is very much the old school command and control management playbook.
The classic, do this because I said so or else method.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of organizational psychology, we can see exactly why that punitive approach consistently fails in the long run.
Because people hate it.
Well, yeah, but biologically too. When you reprimand someone, you trigger their fight or flight response. So you might get behavioral compliance in the short term, just out of pure fear of them losing their job, but you breed massive resentment, and you certainly don't get their best creative work under those conditions. Real coaching, as outlined in the inventory's philosophy, is about redirecting behavior. It's about improving future performance rather than, punishing past mistakes.
Redirecting instead of reprimanding.
Right. You shift the dynamic entirely. You're no longer the boss standing across the table in opposition to the employee. You become a collaborative partner sitting on the same side of the table looking at the problem together.
See, that sounds incredible on a whiteboard.
But
Yeah, but let me push back on this for a second, because I know you, listening to this right now, are probably thinking the exact same thing. When an employee is actively failing, let's say they're consistently missing major client deadlines, they're costing the company money and making the rest of the team work overtime to cover for them, isn't there a very natural, necessary instinct to just lay down the law?
it's a very common instinct, yes.
Right, because if I pivot to redirecting behavior and trying to be a collaborative partner in the heat of a crisis, don't I risk looking like a total pushover?
Hmm.
I mean, it feels like there's a real danger of losing your authority if you're too focused on collaboration when someone just needs to be held accountable.
And that is the exact tension that trips up almost every new manager. They assume that moving away from a punitive model means moving toward a permissive model.
Yeah.
They think coaching means being everyone's therapist and just accepting bad work. But accountability and coaching are not mutually exclusive. In fact, true coaching is the highest form of accountability.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, you don't lose your authority. You channel it into a specific step-by-step process that demands action rather than just demanding fear. The coaching skills inventory relies on a highly structured, research-backed model to navigate this exact tightrope. It gives you a roadmap so you don't have to choose between being a tyrant or a pushover.
Okay, so it's a framework that takes the emotion out of the confrontation. The source text actually details a 7-step roadmap designed for these real-world performance conversations. Now, I don't want to just read a list to you, but I do want to explore the psychology behind how these steps actually function when you are sitting in a room with a difficult employee.
Yeah. The structure is vital because it functions as a psychological safety net for both the manager and the employee.
Okay.
For instance, the very first step the text insists on is building a relationship of mutual trust. If you skip that, nothing else works.
But, I mean, how do you actually do that when you are about to critique someone's work?
Right.
Saying, I trust you, but your work is terrible, doesn't sound very convincing.
No, it doesn't. It's about separating the person's identity from the performance issue. Building trust in a coaching context means communicating, whether explicitly or implicitly, that you have the employee's best interests at heart.
Right.
And that the feedback is in service of their success, not their punishment. It sets a constructive tone before you even really open the formal meeting.
Okay, I see. And then from there, the framework moves into getting agreement on the problem, exploring alternatives, getting a commitment to act, and handling excuses. But it's the relationship between these steps that I find so fascinating. For example, getting agreement and getting a commitment to act. Why are those separated into 2 different steps?
Oh, that separation is probably the most critical psychological insight in the entire model.
Really?
Definitely. Think about how many managers pull an employee into an office, list all the things the employee is doing wrong, tell them how to fix it, and then ask, do we have a deal?
Right. And the employee nods.
Exactly. The employee nods and the manager thinks they had a great coaching session.
Because the employee agreed to fix it.
But they didn't really agree. They just offered empty compliance to escape an uncomfortable situation.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The framework argues that you literally cannot get a genuine commitment to change a behavior, which is step 5, if you have not successfully navigated step 3, which is getting the employee to actually agree that the problem exists in the first place.
That is huge.
Right. If they secretly believe their work is fine and you are just being unreasonable, any commitment they make is just an illusion. The manager has to present the data, ask open-ended questions, and guide the employee to self-identify the gap in their own performance.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I mean, going back to the car analogy, if I don't believe my check engine light is accurate, I am definitely not going to commit to paying a mechanic to fix the car.
Exactly.
I have to agree the car is broken first.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. There's one specific step in this framework that deals with what happens when the employee pushes back. It's formalized as handling excuses. And I just find it absolutely brilliant that handling excuses is acknowledged as a concrete numbered step in a professional management model.
It is a profound acknowledgement of human nature. Most management theories pretend that if you just communicate clearly enough, the employee will smile, thank you for the feedback, and instantly improve.
Which never happens in real life.
Exactly. This model anticipates defensive behavior. When human beings are told their performance is lagging, their ego is threatened.
Sure.
And the natural evolutionary defense mechanism is to deflect. They will say, oh, the client didn't give me the right specs, or the software crashed, or marketing was late with the assets.
So how does making it a formal step actually help the manager in that moment?
Because it completely neutralizes the emotional charge of the deflection. Think about it. If you aren't expecting an excuse feels like a personal attack or a total derailment of your meeting.
Yeah, you get defensive back.
Right. You get frustrated, you start arguing about whether marketing was actually late, and suddenly you are entirely off track. But if you have internalized this 7-step framework, when the excuse comes, your brain just says, Right on schedule, we have arrived at the excuse portion of the conversation.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's like you expect the turbulence, so you don't panic when the plane shakes. You just execute the procedure for turbulence.
That's a great way to look at it. It removes the unpredictability from these difficult conversations. You recognize the excuse not as a factual argument to be won, but as a psychological defense to be navigated.
Right.
You acknowledge it, but you don't validate it as an actual reason for failure, and you just pivot right back to exploring alternatives and getting a commitment to act.
It is incredibly methodical.
Hmm.
But understanding these concepts intellectually, knowing that you need to get agreement and handle excuses is very different from actually applying them under the pressure of a real confrontation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I could memorize this entire philosophy right now, but that doesn't mean I won't freeze up or revert to my old bad habits the second an employee starts getting visibly upset or angry in my office. So how does a manager actually know if they're capable of executing this?
Which I guess brings us to the core of the coaching skills inventory, the actual assessment tool itself. How does the source material put managers to the test? Well, the assessment is explicitly designed to bridge that gap between theory and reality. It doesn't ask you abstract questions about your management philosophy.
Okay, what does it do?
Instead, participants are placed into 18 highly realistic, detailed coaching scenarios. These are grounded, complex situations that any manager might face on a random Tuesday afternoon. For each scenario, the participant is given a set of possible responses and must select the one they are most likely to actually take in real life.
So it's basically a flight simulator for management.
Exactly.
It creates this safe, controlled environment where you can completely botch a one-on-one meeting, crash the metaphorical plane, and learn exactly why you crashed it before you ever try it on a real, living, breathing employee. You get to see how your raw instincts stack up against the actual framework.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer depth of the data it pulls from your responses. Once you complete those 18 scenarios, the tool doesn't just give you a generic pass or fail grade or tell you that you're a B- coach.
Right.
It generates a highly granular coaching effectiveness profile. Your performance is broken down into subscores that are mapped directly back to the 7 steps we just discussed.
Oh, so you see exactly where your specific breakdown is occurring.
Precisely. So the data might reveal that a manager is exceptionally gifted at exploring alternatives, like they're highly creative and love brainstorming solutions. But the data might also show that their score for closing the meeting is abysmal.
Oh, I know managers like that.
Right. Which means they have great brainstorming sessions, but nobody ever leaves the room with a clear deadline or a defined responsibility, so nothing ever changes.
Or maybe they score perfectly on getting agreement because they're very persuasive, but they completely fail at handling excuses because they're too conflict avoidant. They just accept every single excuse an employee throws at them.
Exactly. It moves you from a state of unconscious incompetence. Knowing you're a bad manager but having no idea why, to conscious competence. You know exactly which conversational muscle you need to go train.
That is so practical.
And furthermore, the assessment doesn't just measure you against yourself. It includes a really robust benchmarking feature. Participants can compare their subscores against a normative group of thousands of other managers across various industries.
See, that benchmarking element is critical. Think about it. If you only ever compare your leadership style to the other managers inside your own company, you risk getting trapped in this localized echo chamber of terrible habits.
Yes.
You might look around and think, well, I don't yell at my team nearly as much as Dave in accounting does, so I must be a fantastic coach. You're just grading on a curve of dysfunction.
It shatters that illusion completely. Comparing yourself across industries provides a harsh but very necessary objective standard of what true coaching effectiveness actually looks like out in the broader professional world.
And what I found so compelling in the source material is how efficient this entire revelation is. Like, it actually respects leaders' time. Taking the self-assessment and navigating those 18 scenarios takes about 20 minutes. Then you spend roughly 40 minutes scoring it, debriefing the data, and setting concrete goals based on your blind spots. So in exactly 1 hour, you can diagnose your deepest leadership flaws and actually have a map to fix them.
The return on investment for 1 hour of self-reflection is immense. But as you alluded to, fixing one manager in a vacuum is one thing. The real challenge for any organization is figuring out how to scale this kind of behavioral change across the board.
Right. So what does this all mean for an entire company? Because if you are a listener tuning in right now, maybe you're an HR director, a department head, or a team lead, and you're realizing your company is suffering from this exact lack of coaching capability. How do you practically deploy this thing?
Well, the material outlines that the inventory is highly adaptable. It works just as well for a seasoned executive who needs to refine their approach as it does for a newly promoted team lead preparing for their very first performance review. As for how it's actually deployed, the source text briefly details a few implementation paths depending on the scale of your organization. It scales from a simple 5-pack of print assessments for, say, a small startup team that wants a tactile, paper-based exercise,
Yeah.
all the way up to a fully digital online assessment center designed to instantly route detailed electronic reports to facilitators in distributed global enterprises.
Oh, wow.
There's even a comprehensive facilitator guide for internal trainers who want to expand that 60-minute revelation into a full 3-hour interactive workshop. Oh, and for newcomers, there's a quick start train the trainer option that includes a one-on-one virtual coaching session with an expert.
Okay, so the logistics are highly customizable. You can run it remote, you can run it on paper, you can do it solo or as a cohort. But beyond the logistics of how you buy it, I want to drill down into something very specific that the text emphasizes regarding implementation, because I think it addresses the single biggest complaint organizations have about corporate training.
Ah, you are talking about the follow-up assessment.
Yes, the built-in follow-up assessment. Training, historically, is just incredibly difficult to measure. Let's be honest, we've all been there. You go to some mandatory leadership seminar, you nod along to the PowerPoint, you smile, you eat the catered lunch.
Stale sandwiches.
Exactly. And then you go back to your desk on Monday morning and change absolutely nothing about your behavior.
It is the ultimate frustration for any leadership development program. Companies spend thousands and thousands of dollars on these interventions, and they have no idea if the needle actually moved.
Right.
What makes this implementation model so powerful is that it closes the loop. You administer the inventory before the training as a baseline pre-assessment. The manager learns their blind spots and gets trained on the 7-step model. But the crucial piece is utilizing the identical follow-up assessment several months later.
Which creates pure accountability.
It does. By comparing the pre-assessment data to the post-assessment data, you don't have to guess if the training worked. You actually measure the lasting impact on behavior. It proves definitively whether the managers have genuinely internalized the psychological framework of, handling excuses and redirecting behavior, or if they just temporarily memorized it to get through the workshop.
That is brilliant. It takes the concept of coaching, which for decades has been treated as this soft, squishy, unquantifiable HR initiative and transforms it into a hard, measurable business metric. You can literally track the evolution of your leadership team's effectiveness over time with hard data.
Exactly.
Because if a leader knows they're going to be tested on these specific scenarios again in 6 months, they're forced to actually practice what they learned in their real-world one-on-ones.
It aligns the development of the manager with the broader performance goals of the organization.
That is just an incredibly robust way to build a culture of genuine accountability. Well, as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's just take a moment to look back at the ground we've covered today.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
We really did. We started by confronting the very real, very expensive consequences of bad management, the massive toll it takes on momentum when leaders either avoid conflict entirely or resort to punitive, fear-based control. And from there, we explored the massive psychological shift required to move away from reprimanding past mistakes toward actually redirecting future behavior.
We then pulled apart the mechanics of the 7-step model that makes that mindset shift possible under pressure. We saw how crucial it is to navigate the psychology of getting genuine agreement before you ever ask for a commitment.
Right.
And how formalizing the handling of excuses acts as a safety net for managers, keeping them logically grounded when an employee gets defensive.
And finally, we looked at how the coaching skills inventory uses that 18-scenario flight simulator to generate granular, measurable data, revealing a manager's exact blind spots, and how implementing a pre- and post-assessment strategy allows organizations to prove real ROI and ensure those new skills actually stick. It really is a comprehensive blueprint for transforming how teams communicate.
It absolutely is. And, as we leave you today, I want to offer a final thought for you to mull over, something that builds on everything we've explored in this text.
Okay, let's hear it.
If this entire framework requires building mutual trust as its absolute non-negotiable foundation before a single piece of feedback can be delivered effectively, ask yourself this. How drastically would your team's culture and their output change overnight if every single performance critique they received was genuinely viewed as an act of trust rather than a threat to their livelihood.
Wow. If a critique is received as proof that I believe you can be better, instead of proof that I want to fire you, it changes the entire molecular structure of that relationship. That is a great thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we gave you some deeply practical tools and some fresh perspectives to apply to your own leadership journey. Keep learning, keep questioning your own reflexes, and please, whatever you do, do not just put a piece of tape over that check engine light.
Seriously, don't do it.
Plug in the diagnostic and do the work. We will catch you next time.